Battle of Ilovaisk. On the 28th of February 2014, newly appointed Ukrainian Minister of Defense Ihor Tenyuk briefed the members of Ukraine's National Security Council on the state of the armed forces during Russia's ongoing annexation of Crimea. Speaking plainly, he informed the assembled members that Ukraine effectively had no military. Recently ousted President Yanukovych and his entourage had systematically destroyed it during their tenure. Ukraine could perhaps call upon a total of 5,000 capable soldiers from all of the units in Ukraine in a fight against Russia over Crimea. Russia, meanwhile, had at least 4 times that number just in Crimea at the time. And, the minister correctly pointed out, who would defend the rest of Ukraine if those 5,000, who constituted the sum total of Ukraine's effective army, were sent to engage the Russians in Crimea? Thousands of miles of border with Russia would go unprotected, and the Russians would be in Kyiv by nightfall. Alexander Turkhanov, chairing the council meeting, asked with an air of disbelief evident even in the written transcript about the supposed 15,000 troops that Ukraine claimed to have in Crimea. Were they not capable of action? Tenyuk answered that the figure was only nominal, and proceeded to provide the detailed reasons why that number could not be relied upon. To put this discussion in perspective, Ukraine had been at peace for approximately 23 years during this round of independence for their country. There have been other rounds that were less enduring, and had needed no military during that time. In that one critical moment when an unanticipated and existential military threat came to Ukraine. That one moment in 23 years of existence, Ukraine had no military with which to defend itself against the cruel humiliations of invasion and annexation of which the civilized world dreamed we had collectively disposed. The term, nominal figure, about says it all. Ukraine had on paper a military approximately 130,000 strong. While at first glance the meeting in February of 2014 might seemingly bear little relevance to events that were to take place during the coming summer in East Ukraine. Upon closer reflection, this meeting is absolutely fundamental to understanding the limitations placed on decision-makers and those tasked with executing the orders of the Ukrainian government. Ukraine's military was hollow. It could not be called upon to perform the core missions assigned to it. Unfortunately for Ukraine and many other nations throughout history faced with unforeseen military threats, effective armies cannot be created overnight. The dust has not yet settled in the controversy over Ukraine's performance during the Battle of Ilovaisk. Blame continues to be apportioned to the Ministry of Defense for incompetence and self-interest, to lower-ranking officers for allegedly deserting their units, to the volunteer battalions for their alleged indiscipline, to Russia for their treachery, and many others. The wounds are still raw, as many Ukrainian families still await news of loved ones missing, dead, or captured from that battle. The narratives painted by the various allegations are emotionally compelling and tempting to believe, for in them blame is always laid directly at someone's doorstep. In the end, however, we should search for less heat and more light, which leads us directly to the fateful discussions held in Kyiv on the 28th of February. Ukraine effectively had no military. Ukraine had an exceptionally small number of combat-ready soldiers upon which it could actually rely, and the rest was admittedly nominal. Any discussion of Ukraine's reversal of fortune at Ilovaisk should begin here. When Russian-backed separatists began to seize public buildings in East Ukraine, and hoisting Russian and separatist flags over cities and towns, a motley patchwork of hastily formed pro-Ukrainian irregular forces composed largely, but not exclusively, of local citizens began to take the buildings, towns, and cities back. Most of these units were soon incorporated wholesale into official Ukrainian structures like the Ministry of Defense, MOD, or Interior Ministry, MOI, giving their participation in combat a veneer of legality. Others like the Right Sector and the OUN, Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists, battalions were not. Some of the battalions were backed by local oligarchs motivated by a rekindled desire to maintain a unified Ukrainian state, for a variety of complicated reasons. In the eastern Ukrainian city of Dnipropetrovsk, for instance, one of the first to take action was regional governor and billionaire Ihor Kolomoisky. With a nod from Ukraine's MOI, he reportedly put over $10 million of his own fortune into the creation of a battalion of volunteer fighters to keep the separatists from taking over the city in April 2014. Many of those who initially signed up were recent participants in the Maidan demonstrations. By May of 2014, the city was firmly in Ukrainian hands. Most volunteer battalions were not fortunate enough to have rich sponsors, and relied on volunteer organizations and crowdfunding to make ends meet. The Donbass Battalion, composed mostly of natives of Donetsk and Luhansk, was formed in April of 2014 and later adopted by the Ukrainian National Guard. Azov, A controversial unit formed by radical far-right figure Andriy Beletsky allegedly harboring neo-Nazis, was adopted by the MOD in May. The creation and official absorption of Aider and other battalions followed quickly in June 2014. By August 2014, the number of personnel serving in various volunteer battalions reached approximately 4,000 according to estimates from the Ukrainian MOD. Whatever becomes of Ukraine's volunteer battalions in the future, and opinions are divided on this, it should never be forgotten that they prevented the occupation of even wider portions of eastern Ukraine by separatist and Russian forces and filled the wide gap between the army Ukraine had and the army that it intended to field in the future. Together with Ukraine's few contract soldiers, it is they who largely routed and defeated the separatists in myriad engagements until Russian forces directly intervened in August. Ukraine conducted 2 mobilizations in June 2014 to fill out the army, but events demonstrated that many of those called up were neither capable nor willing to fight. While Ukraine may not have had an effective army in the events leading up to Ilovaisk, it did have a core fighting force of professionals bolstered by volunteer units of loyal and determined patriots. Ukraine had been slowly and fitfully implementing reforms of their system for military recruitment and personnel accessions for years before the crisis in 2014. And the fruits of those efforts were roughly 6,000 contract soldiers serving in approximately 5 brigades throughout Ukraine that were trained and immediately available for duty. This is quite similar to the approximate figure of 5,000 provided by Tenyuk in February 2014. Spread out amongst the 25th Airborne Brigade, 30th Mechanized Brigade, 79th Airmobile Brigade, 80th Airmobile Brigade, the 85th Airmobile Brigade, and the 3rd and 4th Special Forces Regiments. These personnel were immediately assigned to checkpoints in East Ukraine and along the southeastern coast to prevent the spread of separatist and Russian control. From other incompletely manned units, the Ukrainians formed company tactical groups of whatever available personnel were at the unit in question, including officers. Mobilization would fill out other units once personnel were available, but never to their authorized strength. During this time, a unit's size typically ranged anywhere from battalion strength to the size of a single company. The Otto leadership divided the area of operations into 4 sectors: A, B, S, and D. From north to south, sectors A, D, and B were located along the border with Russia from approximately north of Luhansk down to Mariupol on the Azov Sea. Sector S comprised a wide area to the rear of the others, incorporating among others Slavyansk and Kramatorsk. The ATO's progress towards achieving their goals was steady, even under extremely difficult circumstances including artillery barrages from inside Russia and Russia's material support to the separatists. By the beginning of August, Ukrainian forces were well on their way to achieving their strategic goal of physically separating the separatist strongholds of Donetsk and Luhansk both from the border with Russia, as well as from one another. Ilovaisk and Debaltseve were chosen as the southern and northern places respectively to begin establishment of this separating corridor. The Otto had extended government control over approximately 60% of the Donetsk and Luhansk regions, and the separatists were effectively blocked in the north, south, and west. Ukrainian forces had seized key roads linking Donetsk and Luhansk, complicating separatist C2 in movement. Like, comment, share and subscribe to my channel.